In 2012, Salvadoran fisherman José Salvador Alvarenga set sail for Mexico for a 2-day trip, only to be swept away by a storm, surviving 438 days adrift in the Pacific Ocean. Surviving on raw fish, turtles, and seabirds, he drifted over 6,700 miles before washing ashore in the Marshall Islands in January 2014, with his crewmate dying months into the ordeal.
The Pacific Ocean is not one body of water. It is a world of its own, divided into currents and zones that span distances beyond comprehension. In its western reaches, scattered across millions of square miles, lie the Marshall Islands, a constellation of coral atolls so remote that the nearest landmass in any direction measures thousands of miles away. Ebon Atoll sits at the southernmost edge of this archipelago. Its ring of low-lying islands encircles a shallow lagoon, the water shifting between shades of turquoise and deep blue depending on the depth and the light. Palm trees lean toward the shore. The sand is white and fine. The horizon, in every direction, is unbroken. Tile Islet, a fragment of Ebon Atoll, measures no larger than a football field. It is uninhabited for most of the year. A single beach house stands among the palms, used occasionally by locals who come to harvest coconuts or fish the surrounding waters. The island has no roads, no electricity that runs through lines, no connection to the rhythms of the wider world. The ocean here moves according to patterns established over millennia. The North Equatorial Current flows westward, pushing water from the Americas toward Asia. Objects cast into this flow, driftwood, plastic, debris, travel for months or years, covering distances that would exhaust any engine. In January, the air is warm and heavy with moisture. Rain comes in brief, violent bursts. The sun rises over water and sets over water. At night, the stars appear in formations so dense they seem to merge into rivers of light. On January 30, 2014, the ocean delivered something to this shore that had traveled farther than most things do. José Salvador Alvarenga was born around 1975 in Garita Palmera, a small town in the Ahuachapan department of El Salvador. His father owned a flour mill and a store. His mother raised the children. Alvarenga had several brothers, some of whom would later move to the United States. He had a daughter, though he was not present for much of her childhood. She lived with his parents. In 2002, Alvarenga left El Salvador for Mexico. He was in his late 20s. The reasons for leaving are not entirely documented, but many Salvadorans moved north during those years seeking work and stability. He settled in Chiapas, the southernmost state of Mexico, along the Pacific coast. He found work as a fisherman. Chiapas is a region of mountains and coastline. The fishing villages that dot the shore are small and functional. Costa Azul, near the town of Pijijayapan, was where Alvarenga eventually based himself. It was a community built around the sea. Fishermen left before dawn and returned with their catch in the afternoon or the next day, depending on how far they ventured. Alvarenga worked for a man named Willie, who owned several boats. He became known as a capable fisherman, experienced in deep-sea work. He understood the ocean's moods. He knew how to read the weather, how to handle a boat in rough water, and how to find sharks, marlins, and sailfish in the open Pacific. His usual fishing partner was a man named Ray Perez, someone Alvarenga trusted and had worked with many times. The boat Alvarenga used was a standard open-hold fiberglass skiff, about 25 feet long, roughly the length of 2 pickup trucks placed end to end. It had no cabin, no raised structure, no windshield. The deck was open to the sky. A single outboard motor powered the vessel. There was a large icebox, the size of a refrigerator, used to store the day's catch on ice. The boat was designed for efficiency, not comfort. On November 16, 2012, Alvarenga prepared for a routine deep-sea fishing trip. The plan was to stay out for about 30 hours, targeting sharks and other large fish that commanded good prices at market. He loaded the boat with 70 gallons of gasoline, 16 gallons of drinking water, 23 kilograms of sardines for bait, 700 hooks, miles of fishing line, a harpoon, 3 knives, 3 buckets for bailing water, and 91 kilograms of ice. He also brought a mobile phone in a plastic bag, a GPS tracking device that was not waterproof, and a two-way radio with a half-charged battery. There were wrenches for the motor. There was no anchor. Alvarenga had noticed it was missing before departure, but he did not consider it necessary for a trip into deep water. Ray Perez was supposed to accompany him. At the last minute, Perez could not go. Alvarenga did not want to cancel the trip. He arranged for a replacement, a 22-year-old man named Ezequiel Cordoba, known locally by the nickname Piñata. Cordoba lived at the far end of the lagoon. He was known as a strong defensive player on the village soccer team. He was athletic, capable of working long hours without complaint. Alvarenga and Cordoba had never worked together before. In fact, they had never spoken. Cordoba was inexperienced at sea, but he was willing, and the job paid $50. For a young man in a coastal village, it was fair wages for a day and a half of work. On the morning of November 17, 2012, the two men set out from Costa Azul. The weather was clear. The boat moved steadily into open water, the coastline shrinking behind them. They traveled for hours, reaching a point roughly 50 miles offshore, where the deep currents brought the fish they sought. They fished through the day and into the night. By the following morning, the icebox was nearly full, close to 500 kilograms of tuna, mahi-mahi, and sharks. It was a successful haul. If they could bring it ashore, the catch would provide enough money for both men to live comfortably for a week or more. Then the weather changed. The storm arrived on November 18, the second day at sea. It began as a shift in the wind, a darkening of the sky to the east. Within hours, the ocean transformed. Waves rose higher than the boat, crashing over the open hull and filling the deck with seawater. The spray was constant, cold, blinding. Alvarenga gripped the tiller and steered into the waves, angling the boat to prevent capsizing. This required focus and experience. An inexperienced captain might have panicked, begun bailing frantically, and lost control of the vessel's orientation to the swells. Alvarenga knew that keeping the boat aligned with the waves was the first priority. Everything else came second. Cordoba bailed water. He used one of the 3 buckets, scooping seawater and throwing it back into the ocean. The work was exhausting. His shoulder muscles burned. He paused frequently, gripping the rail with both hands. At times he vomited. At times he cried. He had signed up to make $50. He had not signed up for this. The storm intensified. Harbor masters along the Chiapas coast had barred fishing boats from leaving port, but Alvarenga and Cordoba were already far offshore. They were alone in conditions that grew worse by the hour. The waves became unpredictable, slapping against each other in midair, merging into swells that lifted the boat high enough for a brief, elevated view of the surrounding chaos before dropping it like a falling elevator. Around 9 in the morning, Alvarenga saw a change in visibility. The cloud cover was lifting slightly. He could see farther across the water. On the horizon, he spotted the rise of a mountain, the coast. They were approximately 2 hours from land. Then the motor began to cough and sputter. Alvarenga felt the change in vibration before he heard it. The engine was dying. He pulled out the two-way radio and called his boss. "Willie. Willie. Willie. The motor is ruined." Willie's voice came through, steady and calm. "Give me your coordinates. We have no GPS. It's not functioning. Lay an anchor." "We have no anchor." There was a pause. Then Willie responded, "Okay, we are coming to get you." "Come now," Alvarenga shouted. "I am really getting fucked out here." Those were the last words anyone on shore would hear from him. The motor stopped completely. The radio's battery died shortly after. The GPS unit, which had already ceased working in the wet conditions, was now useless. Alvarenga, in a moment of frustration and fury, picked up a heavy club normally used to kill fish and began smashing the broken engine. Then he grabbed the radio and the GPS and threw them both into the ocean. The boat was now adrift, with no power, no communication, and no way to determine position or direction. The storm continued to batter them. The deck was filling with water faster than Córdoba could bail it out. Alvarenga realized the boat was becoming unstable. The icebox, loaded with nearly 500 kilograms of fresh fish, was making the vessel top-heavy. He made a decision without consulting Willie, without hesitation. They would dump the fish. All of it. One by one, he and Córdoba hauled the fish out of the cooler, tuna, mahi-mahi, sharks, and swung the carcasses into the water. The bloody fish attracted attention. Sharks began to circle. Falling overboard now carried a new dimension of danger. They dumped the ice as well, and the extra gasoline. The boat sat higher in the water, more stable, but everything they had worked for was gone. Alvarenga strung 50 buoys together and trailed them from the boat as a makeshift sea anchor. The buoys floated on the surface, creating drag, slowing the boat's drift, adding stability. It was a temporary measure. It would not bring them home. By noon on the first day of the storm, they had lost the motor, the radio, the GPS, and their catch. They were at least 50 miles from shore, possibly farther. The storm was expected to last 5 days. Alvarenga knew this kind of weather. He had seen it before. He understood what they were facing. They took turns bailing water throughout the afternoon and into the evening. The same motion, repeated thousands of times. Scoop, lift, throw. Scoop, lift, throw. Their muscles screamed. Their hands went numb from the cold seawater. Progress was slow, but the pond at their feet gradually shrank. As night fell, the temperature dropped. The men were soaking wet. They turned the icebox upside down and huddled inside it, wrapping their legs around each other for warmth. Their hands were too cold to clench into fists. Every 10 or 15 minutes, one of them crawled out to bail more water, then returned to the shelter of the box. The wind drove them farther offshore. In the darkness, they lost all sense of direction. Were they north of their original position, drifting toward Acapulco? Were they south, moving toward Panama? Or were they being pushed west, into the open Pacific, away from all land? Without instruments, they had only the stars. But the stars do not reveal distance. They do not mark progress. They only confirm that the world continues to turn. The storm lasted 5 days. When it finally subsided, Alvarenga and Córdoba were alive, but they had no idea where they were. The coast had disappeared. In every direction, there was only water and sky. The boat drifted according to forces beyond their control. The North Equatorial Current, a river within the ocean, flows westward from the Americas toward Asia. Objects caught in this current travel at roughly 1 to 2 miles per hour, day and night, without stopping. A boat adrift for a week could cover 100 miles or more. A boat adrift for a month could travel 1,000. Alvarenga understood they could not row back. They had no oars, no sails, no engine. The only option was survival. He established a routine. Routine was the framework that separated living from dying. Without it, the mind collapsed. Without structure, time became meaningless. Each morning, Alvarenga walked the length of the boat, back and forth, imagining he was wandering the world. He convinced himself that he was traveling, exploring, moving with purpose. It was a mental trick, but it worked. It gave him the sensation of progress, of doing something other than sitting and waiting for death. The primary task was food. Without bait or hooks, most of the fishing gear had been lost or damaged in the storm. Alvarenga invented a new method. He knelt at the edge of the boat, pressing his chest against the side, and plunged both arms into the water up to his shoulders. His hands remained steady, a few inches apart, just below the surface. When a fish swam between his hands, he smashed them shut, digging his fingernails into the scales. Many escaped. The fish were slippery, strong, and fast. But Alvarenga was patient. He refined the technique over days, learning the angles, the timing, the pressure required. Soon he was catching fish regularly, small ones at first, then larger species as his skill improved. Cordoba cleaned the catch with one of the knives, slicing the flesh into thin strips. They laid the meat on the edge of the boat to dry in the sun. They ate constantly, raw fish, dried fish, fish that had been exposed to the sun for hours. Alvarenga barely noticed the difference. His body demanded protein, and the fish provided it. They also caught turtles. When a turtle surfaced near the boat, Alvarenga lunged for it, grabbing the shell and hauling it aboard. The turtles were difficult to kill and harder to butcher, but their meat was rich and fatty. Their blood could be drunk when water was scarce. Alvarenga learned to crack the shell, extract the organs, and carve the flesh into portions that could be stored for days. Seabirds landed on the boat occasionally, exhausted from long flights over open water. Alvarenga caught them with his hands. He wrung their necks, plucked the feathers, and ate the meat raw. The birds tasted foul, and Cordoba became sick after eating them, but Alvarenga forced himself to swallow every piece. Calories were survival. Taste was irrelevant. Water was a greater challenge. In the first weeks, before any rain fell, the men drank their own urine. It was salty and unpleasant, but it seemed to provide hydration. In reality, it was worsening their condition, concentrating toxins in their systems and accelerating dehydration. Alvarenga knew not to drink seawater, that would kill them quickly, but he did not yet understand that urine was nearly as dangerous. He ate his own fingernails, swallowing the pieces. He scooped jellyfish from the water and swallowed them whole. They burned the top of his throat, but the pain was tolerable. After roughly 2 weeks at sea, Alvarenga heard a sound, splat, splat, splat. Raindrops on the roof of the overturned icebox. He screamed for Cordoba. The two men scrambled onto the deck and deployed a water collection system Alvarenga had been imagining for days. They scrubbed one of the 5-gallon buckets clean and positioned it with its mouth open to the sky. Dark clouds moved overhead. Rain began to fall, not a drizzle, but a downpour. The men stripped off their clothes and stood naked. In the deluge, mouths open, drinking as much as they could. Water ran down their faces, their chests, their arms. It was fresh, cold, clean. Within an hour, the bucket had 2 inches of water. They drank every few minutes, laughing, unable to believe their luck. After the initial frenzy, they imposed strict rations. The water had to last. They did not know when it would rain again. They began scavenging debris. The ocean's surface is covered with plastic, bottles, bags, containers, drifting on currents that carry refuse from continents thousands of miles away. Alvarenga grabbed every empty water bottle he found, storing them for future rainwater collection. When a stuffed green garbage bag floated within reach, they hauled it aboard and ripped it open. Inside, beneath a layer of kitchen oil, they found half a head of cabbage, some carrots, and a quart of milk. The milk was half rancid, but they drank it. The carrots were soggy, but they ate them slowly, treating each bite as a treasure. It was the first fresh food they had seen in weeks. They also found a wad of chewed gum. They divided it in half. Each man chewed his portion for hours, savoring the burst of flavor, the sensation of something other than raw fish and salt. Alvarenga learned to distinguish types of plastic by sight. Clear bottles were best for water storage. Opaque containers were less useful. He became an expert in oceanic trash, a curator of floating garbage. He also learned to track time. His grandfather had taught him, as a boy, how to use the cycles of the moon as a calendar. Each full moon marked roughly 1 month. Alvarenga counted them carefully. 1 month became 2. 2 became 3. He knew, always, how long he had been adrift. Container ships passed on the horizon. Alvarenga saw them, 20 separate vessels over the course of months. Each sighting filled him with desperate energy. He waved his arms, jumped, shouted, flailed. He tried everything to attract attention. But the ships were massive, automated, moving at high speed. Their crews, if they were even on deck, saw nothing. The small fiberglass boat, low in the water and without lights, was invisible. Still, each sighting gave him hope. It meant they were on a shipping route. It meant the world still existed. It meant they had not drifted into a void. Alvarenga let his imagination expand. He created an alternative reality inside his mind. He conversed with family members who were not there. He ate imaginary meals, the greatest meals of his life, he would later say. He experienced vivid, detailed fantasies. The line between hallucination and memory blurred. His mind became a theater where he could escape the monotony and terror of the boat. He talked to Córdoba. In the early weeks, they spoke often. They discussed their mothers, their regrets, their failures. They promised each other that if they survived, they would become better sons. They would work harder. They would make their mothers proud. They asked God for forgiveness. They made a pact. If Córdoba survived and Alvarenga did not, Córdoba would travel to El Salvador and visit Alvarenga's parents. If Alvarenga survived and Córdoba did not, Alvarenga would go to Chiapas and find Córdoba's mother, who had remarried an evangelical preacher. He would tell her that her son had died at sea, that he had thought of her, that she should stop making tamales for him and let him go. The moon cycled. One full moon, then another. The ocean carried them west. The boat moved slowly, steadily, covering distance that accumulates invisibly. One day looks like the previous day. One week resembles the one before. But the miles add up. The current does not rest. By the end of the second month, Alvarenga had adapted. His body had thinned, but it had not broken. His hands were calloused from catching fish. His skin was burned and scarred. His mind had learned to divide itself, one part focused on survival, the other part wandering through fantasies that kept him sane. Córdoba, however, was changing. He was younger, less experienced, less resilient. He had begun to refuse food. He gripped his water bottle but lacked the energy to raise it to his mouth. His body was shutting down. Depression, in the open ocean, is as deadly as thirst. After 2 months at sea, the differences between the two men became stark. Alvarenga had developed a rhythm, a method for enduring. He caught fish, he ate, he collected rainwater, he walked the deck, he imagined alternate realities. He had found a way to live within the confines of the boat. Córdoba had not. He grew weaker each day. His muscles wasted. His eyes became distant. He stopped participating in the routines that Alvarenga had established. He sat in the same position for hours, staring at the water or the sky, barely moving. The seabirds made him sick. After eating raw bird meat, Córdoba vomited repeatedly. His stomach could not tolerate it. Alvarenga tried to encourage him, offering small pieces of turtle or fish, but Córdoba began to refuse all food. He clenched his mouth shut. He turned his head away. He drank less water. He held the bottle in both hands but lacked the will to lift it to his lips. Alvarenga placed the bottle against Córdoba's mouth, tipping it gently, but the young man did not swallow. The water ran down his chin. Córdoba was starving himself. It was not a conscious decision in the traditional sense. His body and mind had reached a point where survival seemed impossible, and his system was shutting down in response. Depression, in this context, was not merely psychological. It was physiological. It stopped the body's will to eat, to drink, to continue. Alvarenga tried to keep him engaged. He spoke to him constantly. He reminded him of his mother, his family, his life in Chiapas. He told him they would be rescued. He told him to fight. But Cordoba had stopped fighting. One morning, Cordoba looked at Alvarenga and said, "I am dying. I am dying. I am almost gone." Alvarenga replied, "Don't think about that. Let's take a nap." He lay down next to Cordoba, hoping that rest would help. But when Cordoba spoke again, his voice was rough and weak. "I am tired. I want water." Alvarenga retrieved the water bottle and held it to Cordoba's mouth. Cordoba did not swallow. His body tensed. His breath became irregular, shallow. Then his body shook in short convulsions. He groaned. His muscles tightened, then relaxed. Alvarenga panicked. He screamed into Cordoba's face. "Don't leave me alone. You have to fight for life. What am I going to do here alone?" Cordoba did not reply. Moments later, his body went still. His eyes remained open. Alvarenga cried for hours. He propped Cordoba's body up in the bow of the boat to keep it out of the pooling water. He was afraid a wave might wash the corpse overboard before he was ready to let it go. The next morning, Alvarenga woke and looked at Cordoba sitting in the bow. He spoke to him. "How do you feel? How was your sleep?" Then he answered his own question aloud, as if he were Cordoba speaking from the afterlife. "I slept good, and you? Have you had breakfast?" It was easier to pretend Cordoba was still alive than to accept that he was alone. Alvarenga continued the conversations throughout the day. He asked questions and provided answers. He maintained the illusion of companionship because the alternative, acknowledging total isolation, was unbearable. For 6 days, he kept the body on the boat. He spoke to it. He adjusted its position when the boat rocked. He treated it as if Cordoba were still present, merely silent. On the 6th night, there was no moon. The darkness was complete. Alvarenga sat with the corpse, talking, when he suddenly became aware of what he was doing. It was as if he woke from a dream. He was conversing with the dead. He was alone, and he had been alone for nearly a week. He decided it was time. He washed Cordoba's feet. He removed the young man's clothes, a pair of shorts and a red sweatshirt with skull and crossbones designs. Alvarenga put the sweatshirt on. The clothing was useful. It provided warmth at night. Then he slid Cordoba's body into the water. As the corpse disappeared beneath the surface, Alvarenga fainted. He woke minutes later, disoriented, the boat rocking gently in the dark. Cordoba was gone. Alvarenga was alone on the ocean, with no land in sight, no rescue imminent, no companionship remaining. He blamed himself. He had invited Cordoba on the trip. If Alvarenga had cancelled the voyage when Rey Perez could not go, Cordoba would still be alive. The young man would be playing soccer in his village, eating his mother's cooking, living his life. Instead, he had died at sea, starving and afraid, far from home. Alvarenga asked himself why Cordoba had died and not him. Why had he been able to endure when the younger, stronger man could not? There was no clear answer. Survival, in extreme conditions, does not follow predictable patterns. Experience mattered. Mental resilience mattered. But there was also an element that could not be explained, something in Alvarenga's nature that refused to stop. His mother had told him, years before, that those who take their own lives will never go to heaven. Alvarenga believed this. It was one of the reasons he did not end his suffering, even when the temptation was overwhelming. For 4 days after Cordoba's death, he considered it. He looked at the water. He imagined slipping over the side, letting the ocean take him. It would be quick. It would be a release. But he did not do it. He continued to catch fish. He continued to collect rainwater. He continued to count the moons. The boat drifted west. The current carried it farther from Mexico, farther from any coastline Alvarenga knew. He was moving deeper into the Pacific, into regions where ships rarely traveled, where islands were separated by thousands of miles of empty water. Time became elastic. Days blurred together. The routine remained, but the meaning behind it faded. He was no longer surviving with a plan or a hope of rescue. He was surviving because stopping required a decision he could not bring himself to make. He spoke aloud to himself. He invented conversations with family members. He imagined his mother's voice, his father's advice, his daughter's laughter. These hallucinations were vivid, detailed, emotionally rich. They were more real, in some ways, than the boat and the water. The loneliness was absolute. There are different types of isolation: being alone in a room, being alone in a wilderness, being alone in a crowd. But being alone on the ocean, surrounded by infinite water, with no sight of land or other humans for months, creates a specific kind of psychological pressure. The mind, deprived of external stimulation, begins to generate its own. Alvarenga's mind created a fantasia-like world. He tasted meals that did not exist. He experienced physical sensations, warmth, comfort, intimacy, that were entirely imaginary. He walked through landscapes that were conjured from memory and desire. This was not madness in the clinical sense. It was adaptation. His brain was finding a way to survive the absence of human contact, the absence of variety, the absence of hope. He continued to see ships on the horizon. Each one filled him with energy. He jumped, waved, shouted. He knew they could not see him, but he could not stop himself from trying. The ritual of attempting to signal the ships gave him something to do, a moment of purpose in otherwise purposeless days. Storms came and went. The boat took on water, and he bailed it out. The sun burned his skin during the day. The cold soaked into his bones at night. He huddled inside the icebox, wrapped in Cordoba's sweatshirt, shivering. The lunar cycles continued. He had counted 15 full moons. That meant 15 months, give or take. He had been adrift for over a year. He had become, though he did not know it, the first person in recorded history to survive alone at sea in a small boat for more than 12 months. He was convinced his next destination was not land. It was heaven. 14 months. 438 days. 15 lunar cycles counted by moonlight on an empty ocean. José Salvador Alvarenga had survived what no human should endure, and now, in the haze of dehydration and exhaustion, he saw something impossible: land. Shore birds filled the sky, actual birds, not hallucinations. A green Pacific atoll emerged from the mist, surrounded by kaleidoscope waters of turquoise. His hands trembled as he gripped his knife and cut away the ragged line of buoys that had served as his sea anchor. It was a gamble. Without stability, even a moderate storm could flip him, but speed mattered more than safety now. The island was tiny, perhaps the size of a football field. Wild. No roads, no buildings visible. But it was solid ground. 10 yards from shore, he dove. His skeletal arms paddled like a turtle until a wave lifted him and hurled him onto the beach like driftwood. He lay face down in the sand, clutching handfuls as if they were treasure. His body, skin stretched over bone, arms without meat, thighs, skinny and ugly, could barely support itself. He crawled naked through palm fronds and coconut shells, unable to stand for more than seconds. He had washed ashore on Tile Islet, part of Ebon Atoll in the Marshall Islands, one of the most remote spots on Earth, 6,700 miles from where he'd left Mexico on January 30, 2014. Stumbling through undergrowth, he suddenly found himself across a small canal from a beach house. A woman, Emmy Libigneto, stared back at him. "I see this white man there," she later recalled. "He is yelling. He looks weak and hungry." Her husband, Russell Likidrick, approached cautiously. Alvarenga tried desperately to communicate, drawing stick figures of a boat, a man, the shore. But how could simple drawings explain a 7,000-mile drift? His impatience simmered. He asked for medicine. for a doctor. They smiled kindly, shaking their heads, unable to understand his Spanish. Even though we did not understand each other, I began to talk and talk, Alvarenga later said. The more I talked, the more we all roared with laughter. I am not sure why they were laughing. I was laughing at being saved. Emmy and Russell fed him, cared for him. Russell sailed to the main town on Eben to alert the mayor. Within hours, police and a nurse arrived to persuade the wild-looking castaway onto a boat. His legs were swollen, his wrists tiny. His hair jutted upward like a shrub, his beard curled in wild disarray. There was no dramatic relief. No tears of joy. Only the crushing weight of exhaustion, and the beginning realization that 14 months of solitude had changed him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The single phone line on Eben became a battleground. When a visiting Norwegian anthropologist alerted the Marshall Islands Journal, the story exploded globally. Reporters from Hawaii, Los Angeles, Australia scrambled to reach the island. Was this the most remarkable survivor since Ernest Shackleton, or an elaborate hoax? Debate raged. Skeptics emerged immediately. But the hard facts aligned: the missing person report from November 2012, the search and rescue operation, the boat's matching registration number, known ocean currents. Medical examinations revealed a body ravaged by time at sea, multiple scars, extreme emaciation, tissue damage from prolonged dehydration. He was out there for a long time, confirmed the U.S. ambassador. Doctors diagnosed anemia and suspected liver parasites from his diet of raw turtles and birds. Alvarenga became convinced the parasites might attack his brain. After 11 days in the Marshall Islands, he was stable enough to fly home to El Salvador, where family members who'd mourned him as dead now embraced a ghost. But survival didn't mean recovery. For months, Alvarenga remained in shock. He developed a paralyzing fear not just of the ocean, but of any water. He slept with lights on, needed constant company, couldn't find deep sleep. Guilt over Ezequiel Cordoba's death haunted him. He fulfilled his promise, traveling to Mexico to sit with Cordoba's mother for 2 hours, answering every painful question. The media circus followed him everywhere. Legal battles erupted over interview rights. Life on land proved almost as disorienting as the drift itself. It wasn't until a year later, when he finally studied maps of his 6,700-mile journey across the Pacific, that Alvarenga began to fathom what he'd endured. 14 months on the edge of sanity. 14 months of hunger, thirst, and a loneliness so extreme it dissolved the boundaries of reality. I suffered hunger, thirst and an extreme loneliness, and didn't take my life, he reflected quietly. His voice carried the weight of those 438 days, and the burden of being the one who survived. You only get one chance to live, so appreciate it.